Welcome to Echo Shade, where history whispers its darkest secrets and forgotten stories.
In every great monarchy, there lies a silence deeper than power itself. A silence woven into bloodlines, guarded by tradition and protected by fear. For centuries, the British crown has stood as a symbol of stability, virtue, and divine order. Yet behind that shining image, there have always been stories too dangerous for history to keep. The crown, after all, is not only a jewel, it is a shield. It hides what the world must never see. Through centuries of rule, from the Tudors to the Windsors, countless royal children were born, celebrated, and written into history books. But there were others, those whose existence was inconvenient, whose births were mistakes that could never reach the throne. They were the forgotten heirs, erased before the ink could dry on their names. History remembers kings and queens, but it rarely remembers those denied the right to exist. These are not myths or legends whispered by servants. They are pieces of truth deliberately hidden behind royal curtains. The roots of this silence reach far back to the reign of Queen Victoria herself. She, who was seen as the grandmother of Europe, the unshakable matriarch of empires, carried her own secrets more quietly than any monarch before her. Her reign projected morality, family, and virtue, yet her own children were witnesses to pain, exile, and shame. Among them was Princess Louise, Victoria's sixth child, a woman whose life seemed ordinary by royal standards, but whose story would one day become one of the monarchy's most whispered mysteries. Louise was beautiful, intelligent, and rebellious, qualities that made her both admired and feared within the palace. Unlike her sisters, she refused to live as a symbol. She wanted freedom, art, and love. And somewhere in that search for freedom, a rumor was born that Louise had a child out of wedlock, whose existence was swiftly erased to protect the image of the royal family. There are no official documents, no royal statements, and yet, traces remain. Letters hidden, servants' testimony silenced, and records mysteriously missing from the royal archives. For historians, these are more than accidents of record-keeping. They are patterns, deliberate gaps where history should have spoken. Queen Victoria's control over her children was absolute. Nothing escaped her notice. So if a child had truly been born, one who could threaten the purity of the royal bloodline, it would have been concealed with precision. Some say the child was sent away to Scotland, raised under another name. Others believe the baby was quietly adopted into a noble household, with no trace linking them to the House of Windsor. But one fact is undeniable. Princess Louise's personal records from that period are incomplete, and a year of her life remains unaccounted for. It is within this void that the whispers of a hidden heir begin. A story not written in books, but passed down through silence. The Victorian court was a world of masks. Appearances meant survival, and scandal was death. Every movement of the royal family was choreographed, every smile rehearsed for the empire to see. Behind those closed doors, the truth was not denied, it was simply locked away. The story of the hidden heir is not just about one lost child. It is about a pattern, a system perfected over generations to bury anything that could shake the illusion of divine monarchy. Royal blood was sacred, but what happened when that blood flowed in the wrong direction, born to the wrong mother, at the wrong time? The answer was always the same: erasure. And yet, history has a strange way of remembering what it's told to forget. Even in silence, the truth leaves traces. In portraits where faces resemble more than they should, in letters that speak in code and estates funded by unknown benefactors. The forgotten heirs of Britain may never have worn crowns, but their stories remain imprinted in the margins of history, waiting for someone to read between the lines. For centuries, the palace walls have hidden more than jewels. They have hidden bloodlines. And among those hidden names lies the story of the royal heir the world never knew. The story of Princess Louise is unlike that of any other royal daughter. She was not content with the silent obedience expected of a Victorian princess. While her siblings bowed to tradition, Louise painted, sculpted, and questioned. A mind too independent for the palace's marble cages. She was the daughter Queen Victoria could never control completely, and that, perhaps, is where her troubles began. Louise was admired publicly, adored for her charm and artistry. Yet within the walls of the royal household, she was watched with quiet unease. Her friendships with artists, poets, and commoners unsettled the monarchy. She did not fear scandal. His name appeared briefly in royal correspondence, then disappeared entirely, as if history itself had swallowed him. Shortly after, Louise's health suddenly declined. She vanished from the public eye for several months. Officially, she was recuperating abroad. Unofficially, no one truly knew where she was. When she returned, she was thinner, paler, and quieter. Her artistic pursuits resumed, her rebellious charm dimmed slightly, but the palace was different now. Behind the polite smiles, there was tension. The Queen's letters from that year, later revealed in fragments, speak of a dreadful indiscretion and a mother's disappointment. Many historians, even the cautious ones, cannot ignore the missing year in Louise's life. No illness was ever clearly described. No medical records were ever found. But a child, born in secrecy and whisked away, would explain everything. Some claim that the child was a boy, hidden under the care of a trusted family in Scotland. Others suggest that the baby was adopted by royal staff, raised as an orphan of noble birth. One particular name emerges again and again in obscure genealogical research: Henry Lowcock, a man later connected to Louise's circle, whose descendants would strangely resemble the royal line in both manner and appearance. When confronted years later, members of the Lowcock family hinted at royal connections but never spoke openly. Perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of fear. If true, this hidden child would have carried royal blood, a direct descendant of Queen Victoria, yet never acknowledged, never recorded, never granted a title. A royal heir, erased before the world could even know they existed. See, Queen Victoria, ever concerned with public morality, would have understood the cost of revelation. An illegitimate royal child would have shattered her carefully built image of domestic virtue and religious discipline. To protect the monarchy, the truth had to be destroyed. The consequences of that silence echoed far beyond one generation. The royal archives that could confirm or deny such a birth remain sealed. The official biographies of Princess Louise omit entire years of her life. Her private correspondence, destroyed by order of the palace. Even her marriage, later in life, seemed arranged to cover the fracture. She wed John Campbell, Duke of Argyll, a union of convenience, not passion. Their relationship was distant, marked by long separations and unspoken resentment. Louise lived much of her later life apart from her husband, spending long periods in Kensington Palace, alone and guarded. When she died in 1939, her personal papers were quietly removed before her estate was catalogued. The royal household released a brief obituary, elegant, reserved, and empty. Not a single word hinted at the child who might have changed the entire royal lineage. Yet, for those who read between the lines, the signs are unmistakable. Why were her records destroyed when her siblings' letters survived? Why was 1 year of her youth erased so cleanly from history? Why did Queen Victoria's private journals from that same period contain torn-out pages, only from the months of Louise's disappearance? The answers are buried beneath layers of polished history and controlled archives, but the cracks remain visible even under centuries of dust. Princess Louise may have carried a secret that would have rewritten the British succession itself. A secret powerful enough to reshape royal history. And if that child truly lived, their descendants would walk among the British people today, unaware of the crown that might once have been theirs. Some historians dismiss this theory as romantic imagination, but others, quiet, meticulous researchers, still chased the traces of Louise's missing year, the unnamed infant, and the family that rose from nowhere with inexplicable fortune. The palace will never confirm it. The archives will never open willingly. But history has a pulse, and it beats louder each time someone asks the question that the crown fears most. What if the rightful heir was never crowned at all? In the grand timeline of the British monarchy, there are few mysteries as haunting as those involving royal children who simply vanished. Not through myth or magic, but through quiet manipulation, sealed rooms, and the cold efficiency of royal secrecy. Among these tales stands one that history remembers yet barely speaks of, the story of Prince John, the youngest son of King George V and Queen Mary. He was a prince born into luxury, but his life was never meant for the public eye. Prince John was born in 1905, during a time when the monarchy stood as an emblem of perfection. Every photograph, every public appearance, every royal gesture was a performance of power and grace. But John was different from the image the palace wanted the world to see. As he grew, his behavior began to worry the royal physicians. He suffered seizures, what we now know as epilepsy, and displayed signs of what would later be recognized as autism. To the royal household of the early 20th century, these were not merely illnesses. They were flaws, imperfections that could not fit into the image of divine royalty. The decision was made quietly, without scandal, without announcement. At just 11 years old, the prince was removed from public life altogether. He was sent to live on the royal estate at Sandringham, far from London, far from court, far from the eyes of the world. He lived there in isolation, cared for by a small household staff and a devoted nurse named Lala Bill. He was rarely seen by his parents, rarely photographed. And in time, he became more memory than son. When he died suddenly in 1919, at the age of 13, the news came not as a shock, but as a brief note in the newspapers. Prince John, youngest son of their majesties, has died suddenly. No grand funeral, no public mourning, no portraits draped in black. He was buried quietly, his death treated as a private matter, almost as if he had never lived. For decades, his story remained hidden from the public. The royal family never spoke of him. Even within the archives, his name appeared less and less until it was nearly erased. Only in the late 20th century did historians uncover letters written by Queen Mary, letters in which she described her son with a detached tenderness, as if she mourned not the child, but the burden his existence had placed upon the family. It was a great relief when the end came, she wrote. For now he is at peace. Those words, cold and distant, reveal a truth the monarchy could never admit, that the image of perfection demanded sacrifice. And sometimes that sacrifice was flesh and blood. Prince John's disappearance from history is not just a tragedy of one boy. It is a mirror reflecting the system that valued appearances more than humanity. A story reminds us that within the royal family, those who did not fit the image were quietly erased, their names forgotten, their portraits hidden, their existence unspoken. But John's tale also opens a darker question. Was he truly the only one? Because whispers of other vanished royals linger through the corridors of history. There are references, records of noble families who suddenly gained unexplained wealth, coinciding with unrecorded royal adoptions. Even documents from the reign of Edward VII mention discretionary guardianships, a term historians still debate, believed to describe hidden royal offspring entrusted to loyal families. The monarchy's greatest strength was its ability to control narrative. What the people saw became the truth, and what they did not simply ceased to exist. Prince John's fate, tragic yet real, serves as the most documented example of this silent erasure. He became the symbol of how the crown dealt with imperfection, with exile, with secrecy, with disappearance. But for every story like his, there may be others buried deeper. Lost heirs whose names never reached a page, whose bloodline never claimed a title, whose descendants might live ordinary lives today, unaware of the lineage hidden in their veins. The British monarchy has always guarded its archives with near religious devotion. There are rooms within Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace that even scholars cannot enter. Rooms where personal letters, diaries, and unrecorded births may still exist, sealed by generations of silence. Each monarch inherits not only the throne, but the burden of its secrets. And among those secrets, one question continues to echo through time. How many heirs were hidden? How many names erased? And how many royal stories never told? Because if Prince John, a son of the king himself, could be made to vanish quietly, then anyone, born of royal blood yet outside its rules, could vanish even more easily, and history, obedient as ever, would look the other way. Power does not only rule through armies or wealth, it rules through control of memory. For the British monarchy, the greatest act of power was not in what it revealed, but in what it buried. Through centuries, the royal institution mastered the art of silence. Scandals did not vanish on their own. They were dismantled, rewritten, and buried with such precision that truth itself became a casualty of loyalty. Every letter destroyed, every diary edited, every witness rewarded or erased. History was not recorded by chance. It was managed by the crown. During the Victorian and Edwardian ages, the monarchy's survival depended on reputation. To the empire, the royal family was not merely a household. It was the beating heart of national morality. The people believed in their queen as a divine figure, an unshakable mother of virtue. But that belief came with a price. Perfection. And perfection left no room for scandal, no tolerance for illegitimacy, and no mercy for truth. Queen Victoria understood this better than anyone. She kept tight control over her family's image. Even her children's marriages were instruments of diplomacy, not love. When rumors of Princess Louise's secret child began to circle, Victoria's personal secretaries acted with terrifying efficiency. Letters vanished, servants were dismissed, midwives disappeared from records. Whole archives of correspondence were lost in a fire that conveniently spared everything except the letters from that year. The royal household's press office, a seemingly harmless institution, became one of history's most powerful censorship machines. By the early 1900s, no story about the monarchy could reach the public without being filtered through royal approval. Editors were bribed, journalists silenced, and entire printing presses seized when curiosity went too far. A select few reporters, invited into royal circles, received gifts, titles, or exclusive access, all in exchange for silence. The rest were reminded that treason did not always require a courtroom. Sometimes it required only a rumor. Behind this machinery stood the Lord Chamberlain's office, the unseen guardian of royal privacy. It controlled not only court ceremonies, but the royal archives, theater censorship, and private correspondence. Its influence was so vast that it could rewrite a family's history with a single order. When Edward VII, Victoria's son, ascended the throne, he inherited not only the empire, but his mother's secrets. Edward's reign was defined by charm, excess, and scandal. His lovers were many, his affairs whispered across Europe. Yet not one illegitimate child was ever officially recorded, though evidence suggests otherwise. Letters from mistresses, claims from descendants, and quiet payoffs hint at something darker. A network built to protect the purity of succession, even when truth said otherwise. When one woman, a French actress, claimed that her son was fathered by the then Prince of Wales, the royal household's response was swift and surgical. She received a generous pension. Her name was erased from public registers, and her letters disappeared into royal custody. The child was never acknowledged. His descendants, if any exist, would today carry royal blood, unknowingly, silently. By the early 20th century, this practice had evolved into a quiet tradition, unspoken but understood by every monarch. Protect the crown, whatever it costs. Documents that might threaten the image of stability were sealed for national security. Private letters between sovereigns and lovers, vanished into personal vaults. And when historians later asked questions, they were told those files no longer existed, or were restricted for 100 years in the interest of the nation. But whose nation? Whose interest? Even in the modern age, this control remains. In 2011, when historians requested access to the royal correspondence of the late 19th century, including letters linked to Princess Louise, the royal archives denied permission. The reason given, the personal sensitivity. A century later, the silence still holds. Such secrecy has become a habit, almost a reflex of the monarchy, because the crown has always understood that truth is a dangerous currency. If the people ever learned how many heirs were hidden, how many scandals rewritten, how many royal bloodlines silenced, the illusion of sacred inheritance might crumble. History's perfection is an illusion built upon quiet graves. For every crowned monarch, there are countless unnamed children, forgotten lovers, silenced servants, lives rewritten to preserve the myth of divine right. And among them, perhaps, are those whose blood still carries the same lineage as the kings and queens we see today, but who will never know it. The crown, after all, does not destroy its secrets. It only buries them, and somewhere in the dust of locked archives, between the missing pages of royal diaries and the burned letters of long-forgotten servants, lie the remains of a truth that could change everything. The truth of the royal heir the world never knew. For centuries, the truth about the hidden heirs of Britain lived only in whispers, scattered across diaries, letters, and the fragile memories of those too afraid to speak. But as the 20th century turned to the 21st, something changed. Science began to challenge the silence of history. DNA, a code that binds generations together, became the key that the monarchy could not lock away. For the first time, truth could be traced not by confession or archive, but by blood itself. In the quiet laboratories of genetic historians, old legends began to stir again. Names once dismissed as rumor were revisited with forensic curiosity. Could it be possible that traces of royal blood still flowed through the veins of ordinary people? One of the earliest and most daring investigations began in the 1990s when genealogists attempted to confirm the identity of the Russian Romanovs' remains. Their success, linking royal bones to living relatives through DNA, proved a stunning possibility that even the most guarded secrets of monarchies could one day be exposed by science. It was only a matter of time before researchers turned their eyes toward Britain. Historians began examining long-standing theories that certain families of noble yet mysterious origin shared uncanny resemblances to the House of Windsor. In Scotland, descendants of Henry Lowcock, the man some believed to be connected to Princess Louise's secret child, were tested for genetic links to the Victorian line. While official results were never made public, private correspondences between geneticists hinted at startling matches along the mitochondrial DNA chain, the maternal bloodline. If true, such evidence would rewrite royal history entirely. It would mean that the descendants of Queen Victoria were not limited to the royal family we know, that another line, unacknowledged and buried, may have survived quietly for generations. Yet, every time such research gained traction, it seemed to vanish. Funding withdrawn, data sealed, samples mislabeled. The institutions involved would later claim bureaucratic errors or loss of interest, but for those who had seen the early results, it looked like something else. Interference. There were also private collectors who claimed to hold hair samples, letters sealed with blood, and artifacts belonging to royal mistresses and forgotten heirs. Most of these claims were dismissed as hoaxes, yet occasionally, fragments of truth slipped through. A lock of hair, allegedly from Queen Victoria herself, matched to a distant living relative, but the chain of custody was never made public. The monarchy officially ignored such stories. Unofficially, it never stopped watching them. Modern science, however, has made silence harder to maintain. Today, online genealogical databases hold millions of DNA profiles from around the world, people seeking to learn their ancestry, unaware of what they might uncover. Among those results, certain matches have startled researchers. Individuals with no recorded link to nobility sharing genetic markers long associated with royal bloodlines. Historians are cautious. DNA cannot confirm lineage alone without documentary proof, but the patterns are there, faint yet persistent, like the echo of a forgotten song. Somewhere in the British Isles, there may walk men and women who descend directly from the hidden children of queens and princes, blood that carries the same trace as the crowned head seen on national stamps. It is a haunting thought that the true story of monarchy may not live in palaces, but in quiet streets, among people who have never once imagined themselves royal. The power of DNA lies not only in science, but in its defiance of control. It cannot be bribed, silenced, or rewritten. It speaks the same truth to everyone, whether beggar or king, and perhaps that is what frightens the monarchy most. Because in every drop of blood lies a history too honest for power to contain. If science one day confirms the existence of a forgotten heir, even from a century ago, the myth of unbroken royal purity would shatter like glass. Every throne, every crown, every line of inheritance is built on the fragile belief that the bloodline is sacred, traceable, and pure. But blood does not follow ceremony. It flows freely, ignoring the rules of court and title. For the first time in centuries, truth is not something the crown can command. It is something that might rise from within the people themselves, through the silent honesty of their own DNA. And somewhere, perhaps right now, an ordinary person may be living proof of the secret the monarchy tried hardest to bury, the living echo of the royal heir the world never knew. History remembers kings and queens by their portraits, their wars, and their crowns. But every great dynasty has its ghosts, souls erased not by death, but by silence. Among them lies the most haunting figure of all, the heir that time forgot. Centuries of secrecy, whispers of forbidden blood, and stories buried in royal vaults have all led to one chilling realization. The monarchy's greatest mystery is not about power, but about a child the world was never meant to know. That child's name may never be spoken in official records. Their portrait may never hang in any palace. Yet their existence changed everything. When historians trace the quiet edges of the Victorian era, they find small signs, an unexplained payment, a sealed letter, a distant relative whose features resemble a prince. They find evidence of something, someone, carefully hidden under the weight of royal protocol. In one such record, preserved in a private collection, a note written in trembling ink bears a simple line: "The child lives, but not by name." The crown must never know. It was unsigned. No seal, no date. Only a hand that seemed to write in both grief and fear. That single line has haunted historians for decades. Was it written by a nursemaid? A governess? Or perhaps a royal mother who could not bear the silence her duty demanded? If the note was real, it confirms what many already believed, that somewhere, the monarchy traded truth for peace. Those who chase this mystery often find themselves tangled in the threads of time. For every letter discovered, another is burned. For every record that hints at truth, 10 more disappear. The royal archives, vast, sacred, and impenetrable, guard their secrets like tombs. And yet, in the cracks of history, truth survives. In the journals of servants, in the whispers of courtiers, in the blood of descendants who have no idea of the legacy they carry. One such descendant, living in quiet obscurity, once told a BBC interviewer off camera, "All I know is that my grandmother always said we came from the palace. But we never spoke of it again." Her family owned nothing of grandeur. No jewels, no title, only an old brooch engraved with the royal crest. A relic of a lineage denied, perhaps, yet never forgotten by fate. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes. The British crown has always survived not by revealing its truth, but by controlling it. Every scandal, every hidden love, every lost heir, rewritten, buried, or turned into rumor. Because to admit the existence of another royal bloodline would shatter the illusion that the monarchy has been built upon since its dawn. The illusion of divine, unbroken right. But the truth is different. The royal blood has never been pure. It has been human, flawed, passionate, afraid. And in that humanity lies its beauty. The forgotten heir may never wear a crown, but perhaps that is what makes their story eternal. They represent what the monarchy could never publicly admit, that even the most powerful bloodline is vulnerable to love, to secrecy, and to time. Imagine it, a forgotten descendant walking the streets of London, unaware that their veins carry the same royal blood that once ruled empires. They pass by the palaces where their ancestors lived, never knowing that history once belonged to them. No gods salute, no portraits honor them. And yet, in the silent rhythm of their heartbeat, the past still echoes. That is the tragedy, and the poetry of history. The heir that time forgot is not merely one child. It is every soul erased for the sake of a perfect crown. It is every name scratched from the record to protect an image that never truly existed. History belongs not to the victors, but to those who were silenced. And their stories return like ghosts, no matter how many centuries pass. If one day the truth is finally spoken, if bloodlines are confirmed, if names are restored, it will not only rewrite the story of monarchy, it will remind us of something far greater. That power fades, but blood remembers. And even when time tries to erase it, the truth finds its way home. The forgotten heir may never sit upon a throne, but in the silent corridors of history, their name, unknown, unspoken, will always reign. Because some crowns are not made of gold, but of truth that refuses to die. History remembers kings and queens for their crowns, their portraits, and the dates that mark their rule. But for every monarch who ascended a throne, there were others. Children born into secrecy, their names erased by silence, their blood deemed too dangerous for the record. These were the heirs the monarchy could never acknowledge, and time, though merciless, has never completely buried them. For centuries, the British royal family has been built on the illusion of perfect lineage, a sacred bloodline untouched by scandal, sanctioned by God. Yet behind the glittering facade of royal order, history reveals something far more human and far more fragile. Hidden among the pages of court diaries and private letters are the traces of forgotten heirs. Men and women who might have changed the line of succession forever, had the truth been allowed to breathe. The first shadow, Queen Victoria's family secret, the story begins, as so many royal mysteries do, with Queen Victoria herself. Her reign defined an era, yet her family life was a tapestry of unspoken sorrow. Historians have long speculated that one of her daughters, Princess Louise, carried a secret the monarchy could never admit. Louise was independent, intelligent, and fiercely modern, a spirit that often clashed with her mother's rigid moralism. In 1866, whispers began to circulate within the royal household that Louise, then just 18, had fallen in love with a tutor or an artist outside the approved circle of aristocratic suitors. Some claimed she became pregnant. There is no official record of such a child, but then that is precisely how royal discretion works. In the archives of the National Records of Scotland, there exists an entry for a child born in December 1866 at a private address near Westminster, a child whose birth certificate was later sealed and untraceable. Biographers such as Lucinda Hawksley and Jane Ridley have pointed to gaps in Louise's documented whereabouts that year, and to strange payments recorded by the Lord Chamberlain's office shortly afterward. The most persistent claim connects this lost child to Henry Lowcock, a civil servant who, decades later, presented letters and artifacts linking him to the royal family. He insisted he was descended from a lady of high birth, and his resemblance to portraits of Queen Victoria's daughters was striking. The palace never acknowledged him. The official line was, and remains, silence. If true, That child would have been a grandchild of Queen Victoria, one whose existence, had it been recognized, might have complicated the entire royal succession. Yet the empire's image could not afford such a scandal. In Victorian Britain, reputation was monarchy's greatest weapon and its most fragile shield. The hidden line of Prince Eddie a generation later, the throne was again shadowed by whispers. Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, known to history as a Prince Eddie, was the elder brother of George V, and for a time, the direct heir to the British throne. Charming yet controversial, Eddie was the subject of endless speculation. Rumors of secret liaisons, forbidden affairs, and a child born outside marriage. One theory, popularized in the early 20th century, claims that Eddie fathered a son with a woman named Annie Crook, a shop assistant in London's East End. According to the story, their child, Alice Margaret Crook, was spirited away and raised under another name, with royal agents ensuring no trace of her parentage remained. Historians remain divided on the evidence. Some dismiss the claim as sensationalist Victorian gossip, while others note peculiar details, private payments recorded by court officials, an unexplained stay of Prince Eddie in Whitechapel, and the strange involvement of royal physicians in the removal of Annie Crook to an asylum. Asylum. Though modern scholars largely reject the more extreme theories, they agree on one fact. The royal archives for that period remain conspicuously incomplete. Key letters, diary pages, and personal correspondence were destroyed or remain sealed for reasons of state. If Eddie truly had a child, that bloodline would have rivaled that of George V. Meaning, by technical descent, today's monarchy could trace a different lineage entirely. Whether myth or buried truth, the story of Prince Eddie reveals how quickly inconvenient lives vanish when they threaten the crown. The wartime secret. The child of Edward VIII in the 20th century. The crown faced another storm, one recorded by journalists, sealed by governments, and nearly erased by history. The abdication of King Edward VI, Edward's love for Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, shattered royal convention. He chose her over the throne, but his story may not have ended there. After the abdication, Edward lived abroad, holding the title of Duke of Windsor. Unofficially, several British diplomats hinted that the couple had a private child, born during their early relationship in the 1930s. One account, buried in declassified Foreign Office files, refers to a matter concerning a birth certificate suppressed at the highest level. The document remains unreleased. No names are given, but rumors persisted among palace staff, especially one suggesting that the Duke maintained anonymous trust funds in the Bahamas for a young dependent. The existence of such a child, if proven, would once again have rewritten the royal line. George VI, and by extension Queen Elizabeth II, might never have reigned. But like so many royal truths, this one was likely smothered under diplomacy and time. Princess Margaret's lost legacy even in the mid-20th century, secrecy still clung to the monarchy. Princess Margaret, the Queen's younger sister, was a woman of emotion and defiance. Her love for group Captain Peter Townsend had already caused scandal, yet later in life, Margaret's name was again tied to rumors of a child born before her engagement to Anthony Armstrong Jones. No conclusive evidence was ever found. Yet in certain circles of the British press, there were whispers of a birth in Italy. A brief absence from public duties, followed by the quiet disposal of official papers. The royal household denied everything. Still, former staff members who spoke anonymously decades later described a matter of utmost discretion, handled personally by senior aides. If such an event occurred, it would have been the last great royal concealment before the modern age of media transparency. No. After Margaret's death, some of her private correspondence was destroyed at her own request. A decision that fueled speculation that one more royal secret had gone to the grave. The mechanism of erasure. What all these stories share is not merely secrecy, but method. Throughout British history, the Crown developed a precise system for erasing what it could not explain. When a scandal threatened the line of succession, documents vanished. Doctors were sworn to silence under the Official Secrets Act. Birth records were sealed or registered under false names. A royal child could disappear into adoption under the care of trusted courtiers, while financial guardians ensured quiet comfort for life. In return, there would be no claims, no memoirs, no lawsuits, only silence bought by loyalty or fear. This system ensured stability, but it also built a wall between truth and history. For the monarchy, such omissions were acts of survival. For historians, they remain the great unspoken tragedies of royal heritage. The trace of blood genetic research has begun to challenge that silence. In the past 2 decades, the rise of DNA databases and ancestry testing has revived old questions once thought impossible to answer. Distant families from Scotland, Canada, and India have claimed connections to the Victorian and Edwardian royal lines, some supported by striking genetic similarities to known descendants. In 2018, a genealogical study conducted by independent researchers traced a branch of descendants bearing mitochondrial markers identical to those of Queen Victoria's maternal line. The individuals involved had no known link to the royal registry, but their family records pointed to servants and attendants within royal households during the 1860s, precisely the period when Princess Louise's rumored child would have been born. Though unverified, such findings reignited debate in academic circles. Could DNA one day confirm what history concealed? The royal archives, however, remain closed. Access to the personal correspondence of Queen Victoria's children is restricted. The palace maintains that such matters are private family affairs. In practice, that means certain truths may never leave the vaults of Windsor. The cost of perfection for all its splendor, monarchy is a fragile performance. Every ceremony, every gesture is designed to preserve an image of divine continuity, that the crown passes seamlessly from one generation to the next, unbroken, unquestioned. But reality is never seamless. Beneath every portrait lies the cost of maintaining perfection. The hidden heirs, if they existed, were victims not of scandal but of expectation. They were erased because they complicated a story that had to appear simple. In their silence, they carried the burden of preserving the crown's illusion. To admit their existence would have been to admit that royalty, like all human families, is fallible. And so, silence became policy. For the monarchy, this silence was survival. For the forgotten heirs, it was a quiet exile that history could not undo. The modern reckoning today, as historians revisit these shadows, a new question arises. Should these erased lives be restored to the narrative of royal history? Modern Britain has changed. Transparency, genealogy, and historical accountability have replaced the blind reverence of old. The public is no longer shocked by imperfection. In fact, it is often moved by it. Yet the monarchy continues to guard its secrets as fiercely as ever. In 2021, a parliamentary inquiry into the handling of royal archives noted that insignificant portions of the Victorian and Edwardian record remain inaccessible for reasons that no longer serve public interest. The report mentioned unnamed sensitive genealogical materials, a phrase that ignited speculation among historians and journalists alike. But despite growing pressure, Buckingham Palace has maintained its silence. No confirmations, no denials. Just the echo of centuries-old discretion. Perhaps that is the final irony. In an age where nothing remains hidden, the greatest royal secret may still sleep, untouched in the dust of the archives. The meaning of blood, what, then, do we make of these stories? Were there truly children of royal blood, denied their heritage and written out of history? Or are these tales the inevitable myths born from a nation's obsession with monarchy? The answer lies somewhere in between. There is truth, provable, documented truth. In the royal family's history of concealment, illegitimate births, affairs, and arranged silences are not speculation. They are part of the historical record, but whether any one of these erased children could have claimed the throne, we may never know. Yet perhaps that uncertainty is the most telling fact of all. For in a system built on lineage, uncertainty itself is the greatest threat. The crown depends on clear bloodlines. Ambiguity endangers faith, loyalty, and legitimacy. Thus, every unknown child becomes an existential danger, a question mark the monarchy cannot afford. The final legacy as centuries pass, the palaces remain, their portraits watching from gilded frames. The monarchy endures, reshaped by time, yet still bound by tradition. But beneath the grandeur lies a more intimate truth. The story of a family that has loved, lost, and hidden as fiercely as any other. The heir that time forgot is not a single person. It is the accumulation of every silence, every erased birth, every untold story sacrificed to the altar of royal perfection. It is the humanity behind the crown, the reminder that power is fleeting, but blood remembers. Perhaps one day a name will surface, a record will be unsealed, or a descendant will find in their DNA the echo of royalty denied. If that day comes, it will not shake the foundations of monarchy, it will simply complete them, because no dynasty is truly whole until it faces its own shadow. The forgotten heirs are not rivals to the throne. They are its mirror, reflecting the price of legacy, the fragility of power, and the simple, tragic truth that even the mightiest bloodline cannot silence history forever. And so the story closes, not with a coronation, but with a whisper. A whisper that says, truth endures. That beneath every crown lies a heart that once broke in secret, and that somewhere, far from the palaces of London, the blood of kings may still flow quietly through the veins of those who will never know their name. Heirs not to a throne, but to a secret too heavy for history to carry. Because in the end, the crown may forget, but blood never does.